54 Japanese tried to kill 1 American. See what happened in just 7 minutes. The line cuts the air like a rifle crack. A 19-year-old Marine presses his back to sun-baked coral and watches men fall to his left. The ground under him is sharp and white, jagged as broken teeth. The sky hangs low and blue. Somewhere ahead, through a slit in reinforced concrete, a machine gun breathes fire and oil and death. A quick note on numbers and names. Contemporary accounts vary. Some reports list about 50 defenders, others as many as 54. This retelling follows the title's framing while acknowledging that sources differ. The island is called Peleliu, sometimes spelled Peleliu in wartime dispatches. Either way, the problem was the same. A ring of reinforced concrete pillboxes, steel-clad firing ports, and interlocking fields of fire designed to shred an assaulting landing force. September 18, 1944. The capture of Peleliu was supposed to be a straightforward leap towards securing the Western Pacific. Instead, the Marines hit a defensive architecture so patient and exact that it rewrote their map. Colonel Kunio Nakagawa had turned Peleliu's ridges and scarps into a fortress. The Japanese defenders had built a network of pillboxes, roughly a dozen main bunkers backed by interconnected positions, each sited to cover approaches with overlapping fire. Tanks could not find purchase on the coral. Naval gunfire and heavy artillery could not easily zero in without known targets. The reef and the reef's jagged coral made vehicle support unreliable. The landing force found itself cut down on an open, unforgiving stage. On the seawall and the fractured reef, small units of the 7th Marines tried every textbook remedy. Suppression fire, creeping bounds, flamethrower teams, demolition charges, all met with the same stubborn, lethal geometry of concrete and iron. Men moved and were met by concentrated, well-trained machine gun fire. A single pillbox could hold a lane against an entire platoon. The standard solutions were unreliable or unavailable in the moment. And in the critical seconds, the fight narrowed to simple, unglamorous calculus. If the pillboxes weren't taken, the beachhead would be ground to a halt. Arthur Jackson was 19, private first class, a barman, the Browning automatic rifle, a heavy shoulder-borne automatic weapon, roughly 19 pounds and designed to lay down sustained suppressive fire. It was his job to put weight and hunger and thunder into those rounds so others might move. He had trained with it, he knew how to feed it, how to keep it firing, and he knew the sound of 20 rounds singing out of its magazine and what that sound could buy, for a few vital moments, in human life. The sector where Jackson's platoon came up was a shattered world of coral ridges and pitted sand, punctuated by concrete. The first contact had been brutal. A Japanese Type 92 machine gun, heavy, vicious at range, poured what looked like forever into the landing craft staging area and then down the beach approaches. Men tried to flatten against the broken rock and find the small shadows the coral offered. They could not. Each exposed run became an equation. Distance plus time plus the number of rounds you could keep in the enemy's face. Jackson watched his rifle squad to his left get clipped, then broken. He watched a sergeant take fire. He watched the machine gun's muzzle flash in the pillbox slit, and understood, with the simple clarity of someone whose brain had been stripped down to the mechanics of survival, that the only way forward was to make the pillbox stop firing. There is an odd, terrible clarity during moments like that. Plans grow thin. Orders, if they come, are half-heard. The terrain finds you as if you were a chess piece, and suddenly someone moves the rook. Jackson made a decision that could have been called reckless or simply plain and necessary. He would cross the open coral and take the enemy position himself. He had to cover roughly 150 yards of exposed reef to reach the first cluster of concrete. That run, in the record people cite, left him exposed for only seconds, each a gamble. A bar's 20-round magazine is not a comfort when light is coming at you from the front. It is instead a promise of brief volume, a rolling, earth-shaking bark meant to force heads down and eyes away. Jackson slung it at his hip and moved. The narrative tightens here. The tale compresses time. Present tense works because the world feels immediate. He runs. Bullets thud into coral around his feet. Dust smoke slashes the air. He fires as he goes, not in an elegant controlled volley but in a torrent, the kind of suppression you use to manufacture a shadow between you and the enemy. to make a machine gunner hesitate just enough that you're not a target, you're a blur. A bar is heavy. Each magazine is precious. He dumps rounds into the open ports, the weapon staggering as his hand takes the recoil. He changes magazines under fire, fingers fumbling, then finding the metal, and keeps the roar alive. When he reaches the first bunker, conventional breaching tools are thin on the ground. The flamethrower teams had been chewed out or pinned. Artillery could not be summoned without exposing the friendly lines. So Jackson adapts to the bunker's smallness. He drops to the coral, moving to the pillbox's flank, using every inch of fractured rock as concealment. From the side, he hurls a white phosphorus grenade into a firing slit. White phosphorus burns and smokes. It obscures and disorients and forces defenders from their ports. It is horribly effective at taking away sight lines. The grenade roars in. There is a flash. The machine gun's bark falters. Then he does something that the battlefield rewards in the worst possible way. He follows where the smoke opens, climbs to the bunker's roof despite the risk of grenades or rifle fire from other angles, and looks for the ventilation shaft. These pillboxes were not flawless. The human need for air, for a way to break heat and smoke, left them with small mechanical vulnerabilities. Shafts, vents, seams, places where a keen man might put the fight right into the belly of the concrete. Jackson fires into a vent. He uses fragmentation grenades down the shaft when he can. On another bunker, he rips open the firing port with a satchel of explosive, C2 plastic, roughly 40 pounds in the big works when a man could get it in place. He works quick. No single trick alone will take a bunker. The geometry of concrete demands combinations. Phosphorus to blind, fragmentation to clear, explosive to breach. He improvises those steps, sequencing them against the enemy's rhythm. He does not do this in solitude for long. The human machine of the Marines begins to move into the holes he makes. As each pillbox is neutralized, even quietly, it creates an escape for small groups to bound forward. Men begin to take advantage of the broken fields, shifting beam by beam into positions that had been impossible 40 minutes earlier. The first pillbox falls, then a second, not by the neat arithmetic of training but by a messy chain of improvisations. A rifle to the vent, a grenade through a roof seam, a desperate charge when someone inside is stunned enough to be disordered. This section, the initial breach sequence, is the 7-minute crucible that the title points to. In it, Jackson's actions are a series of high-risk ordinals: sprint, suppress, grenade, mount, vent shot, explosive placement. In the space of minutes, he strips a lane that allows an entire squad to maneuver. The reality of the situation forces micro-economies of decision. He is often out of standard ammunition for his bar because sustained fire eats a magazine quickly. At one point, when the second magazine goes dry, a captured Garand sits on the coral like a small providential machine. Jackson and a nearby Marine strip ammunition from the Garand. They transfer clips, they jury-rig the feed. He improvises magazine changes and keeps the bar hot. It is not pretty, it is effective. There are small cold math moments along the way that underline the risk. He had 20 rounds in a bar magazine and about the same number of seconds to reach cover. A Type 92 or a Type 97 machine gun takes little time to send a man to the earth. One misstep and the run ends. But suppression works. The idea behind suppression is not to kill everyone in the hole. It is to make the hole less accurate, less constant, less capable of sending perfectly aimed death into your chest. Jackson's fire is messy and loud and full of intent. It makes the bunker more like a blind organ than a precision instrument. Some of the techniques he uses are born of training, others of necessity. Shooting into ventilation shafts to force defenders to cough and move is textbook in a limited way, but it carries its own hazards. Throwing white phosphorus is brutal in effect and morally weighty in result. It burns both wood and conscience. Using 40 pounds of C2 is mechanical, almost industrial. Place the charge where the concrete is thickest and the structure weakest, back away, and let demolition do its work. He does all of these things in quick succession, while the world around him roars. Between each assault there are micro-pauses, the split seconds when he can listen. A bunker that has been smoked out might cleanse itself, and the sound of movement inside could mean a counterattack at once. Men shout. Someone calls for a medic. Ammo is passed. A sergeant tries to set a perimeter with 3 men and a Browning. They hold a palm-sized bit of ground against an entire slope of steel and sand. For the men arriving to exploit the breaches, each step forward is a test of nerve. For the defenders who wake to the realization that their lines have been pierced, the reaction is swift. A counterattack. And the Japanese reaction comes not as a single man at a time, but as a disciplined, organized movement. Reports put a 40-man counterattack in motion, ordered to close the gap and eliminate the attacker. 40 trained men, moving to seal a breach, taught to flow like water into a wound. The record makes clear that the counterattack aimed to cut off the Marine who had made the hole and to retake control of the southern approach. It is in this moment the larger tactical picture sharpens. Jackson is no longer a single man acting in isolation. He has become a pivot around which both sides now maneuver. For a moment, the calculus is brutal and simple. If 40 enemy soldiers can be brought to bear on the breach, the hole could be closed and the beachhead's momentum arrested. If Jackson and those with him can hold, and the supporting Marines can encircle or reinforce quickly, the breach will widen into a rout. The center of gravity has shifted from a defense in depth to a fight over a narrow, exposed lane. He knows, as any well-trained man knows, that movement alone will not win this. It requires support. Ammunition, grenades, a flamethrower to reach the stubborn crevices, someone to throw explosive charges into what little venting the pillboxes leave exposed. The M2 flamethrower teams are invaluable, but they are heavy and vulnerable. Tanks are largely useless on the reef. Naval gunfire requires coordination and risks friendly fire into the men still struggling across the coral. So Jackson and a handful of Marines do what small units have always done when the larger system cannot move fast. They bind together and fight with what they have. They set up firing positions on broken coral. They improvise feeding devices for guns. They use captured ammunition when theirs runs low, and they move grenades and satchels into ready hands. Shielded by a broken lip of rock, they hold the lane open just long enough for reinforcements to begin to close around the counterattacking Japanese force. These moments are tight with detail. The sound of a bar spits tin and copper. A Type 97's report is deeper, chunkier. Shouts in Japanese and English cross the air, brief and urgent. Marines lay down suppressive arcs to pin movement, and then, brutally, the two sides grind together in a corridor of rock and concrete. Close in, a defenseman might see faces and hands, an awful human moment that turns the tactical into the moral. In the strict way that a battle does not care about a man's age, 19 goes to war as easily as 50. Within this immediate fight, there are episodes of improvisation that stand out. At one point, Jackson and another Marine find a Garand rifle abandoned near a shell hole. The Garand uses 8-round en-bloc clips, incompatible with a bar, but the Garand's ammunition can be pressed into service. They strip rounds, transfer them carefully, patch together what they can. It is a scrap metal jury-rigged solution, a little human ingenuity holding back a larger tide. When the counterattack comes, initial contact is ferocious. Small groups collide. Hand grenades arc like small suns. The men who had been pinned now are pinned again, this time in a newly shaped battlefield where the line of advance is narrow and hostile. But the presence of a newly created lane makes a psychological difference. The attackers have been hurt. The defenders have been stopped from their rehearsed rhythm of killing the landing and are now forced into pitched, close fighting. The immediate tactical results of Jackson's action are visible and stark. Where a continuous wall of fire once held the beach, there is now a crack, a path through which squads can pass, and flanking movement can threaten rear firing ports. Casualties among the defenders increase. The pillboxes that had been silent sentries begin to sputter and then fall silent. Marines who had been unable to reach certain approaches now do so. The southern perimeter shows the first real signs of collapse. A series of bunkers, once a straight line of lethal apertures, begins to stagger. But war is never a simple narrative. For every bunker destroyed, another man must cover the hole. For every breach made, another enemy unit may be waiting to seal it. The Japanese command on Peleliu is disciplined. It reacts. A counterattack of 40 men takes disciplined, purposeful form. They push toward Jackson's position, intent on cutting off the man who has been the hole's architect. In the confused geometry of reef and concrete, these men move with orders to stop the advance and to retake the point at all costs. Jackson and a small group of Marines meet the thrust. They do not have the weight of numbers the enemy brings. They have instead a combination of fire discipline, the tactical advantage of position, and the fact that their suppression has created small pockets where movement is possible. They hold, barely. They pass ammunition hand to hand. They hurl grenades into bunched enemy formations. They drop and fire and drag men into whatever cover exists. For a time, the momentum is in doubt. The line could go either way. As the small fight grinds on, larger elements begin to react. Leaders on both sides see the stakes. If the counterattack is crushed, the South defensive belt will begin to unravel. If the counterattack succeeds, the beachhead's progress may stall and the assault force could suffer for days. The battlefield expands in both commanders' minds. But in the immediate pocket of Coral, the person who matters most is simple and single. A 19-year-old who ran across open reef with a heavy automatic rifle and refused to stop. There is a grim calculus to such heroism. Tactical ingenuity wins ground. Tactical ingenuity exacts a price. Men die to make holes into which others rush. The Marine who created the opening becomes a focal point for enemy ire. The counterattack is not just a military response. It is an attempt to erase the initiative he has forced the attacker to concede. The men in gray and the men in khaki collide, and for a moment the beach is a place of contained, ferocious human struggle. At the end of the 7-minute crucible, the immediate result is clear, but the road ahead is still jagged. Jackson's actions have created an opportunity. Marines use it. The counterattack is thrown back, at least at first. The southern perimeter is on the verge of unraveling. But there are still more bunkers, more fields of fire, more concealed seams that will take more than bravery to clear. Ammunition will run low. Men will be wounded. Commanders will call for reinforcements. Orders will be adjusted. The war on Peleliu is not done. Before any of that, in the soft second after the first crash of action, Jackson looks out across the reef. He breathes through sand in his mouth and salt in his nose. He counts his magazines as if they were the remaining minutes of his life. Around him, Marines move into the gaps he has made. The first crucial phase of his assault, that brutal improvisational 7 minutes, has already reshaped the immediate battlefield. But another larger test is forming just beyond the edge of his hearing. A disciplined enemy force aims to seal the breach. Larger Marine elements are trying to envelop and rout that force. The next moves will determine whether the opening becomes a rout or a footnote. If you like detailed battlefield stories, hit like and subscribe. It helps keep these histories visible. The men at the edge of the gap know the stakes. Reinforcements whisper across the Coral. The din of the fight becomes the backdrop for quick decisions. Who will hold? Who will push? Who will carry wounded out? Jackson shoulders his bar again. For now, the immediate crisis has been met. For now, the battered line has a hole through which life might pass. But the real test, the coordinated blows, the three-pronged attacks and the work to collapse the entire southern defensive belt, has not yet arrived. The sky remains the same high bruised blue. The reef keeps its sharpness. Men move through the space Jackson made, and somewhere among them the ripple of what he did spreads outward. Reports would later compress it into awards and citations and a Medal of Honor recommendation. For the moment, though, it is still only coral and concrete, gunfire and breath. A 19-year-old's decision that turned a desperation into a direction. Beyond the immediate line, commanders on both sides rearrange chess pieces. The Japanese prepare to commit more forces to close the breach and to punish the attacker. The Marines marshal what support they can. Flamethrower teams move in whenever the reef allows. Demolition specialists ready charges. Small groups prepare to flank the remaining pillboxes. The battle is expanding from a brutal brief run into a larger, more complex fight, one that will test not just individual nerve, but the capacity of units to coordinate under severe fire. Arthur Jackson is at the center of that expansion. He has become, for the moment, the hinge of the Southern struggle. What he did in those fierce minutes bought the Marines an opportunity. What happens next? Whether the opportunity widens into the collapse of a defensive line or closes under an enemy counterstroke, will be decided in the next phase of the fight, as reserves move, as charges are placed, and as men exhaust the small pool of improvisations that won the first blood. And yet even as commanders plan, The human questions press close. How many men did those pillboxes hold? How many would rush to retake the ground? Who among the defenders understood, in their own way, that they faced a single man who had made himself a storm? The numbers and the names will later be etched into reports and into medals. For now, on the reef, everything is immediate and tactile. The grit under fingernails, the sting of smoke, the weight of spent brass. The afternoon wears on. The coral keeps its shapes. The pillboxes still stand in places. The immediate breach has widened, but the southern defensive belt is not yet broken. Commanders adjust. Men reload. The fight has moved from a 7-minute crucible into a wider, longer conflict that will demand more than courage. Jackson's run is, in this moment, both a turning point and only the beginning. The crack of the first collapses is sudden and terrible. A blast of powder and concrete, a spray of dust that smells like iron and salt. Around the hole Jackson made, Marines pour their weight. Leaders seize the moment. Orders, once scattered, begin to stitch together into a plan. A coordinated strike against the southern cluster. 3 pillboxes arranged like a triangle, each covering the other's blind spots. If those 3 fall, the southern belt will lose its anchor. If they hold, the beachhead may stall for days. The 3-pronged attack is classic small unit thinking under fire. One team fixes and suppresses, one team moves on the flank, another hits the objective from a different axis. It requires timing, nerve, and an appetite for risk. Jackson, exhausted and low on rounds but still dangerous, becomes a hinge in that plan. He is not ordered to lead the assault. He is already led by action. Men look to him because he has carved a true lane. They move because he did not wait. Flamethrower crews prepare at the lip of a shell-scarred hollow. The M2, heavy, dangerous to the operators, is fed and tested, its nozzle warmed with trembling hands. Demolition men plug satchels of C2 into seams they have pried at with bayonets and entrenching tools. Rifle squads edge to the flanks under a curtain of suppressive fire from Barr's and Thompson's submachine guns. Private Henderson and a sergeant form the inner cordon, ready to hurl grenades and drag a wounded urchin away from firing slits. The attack begins in a cadence. A burst to suppress, a grenade to shock, a dash across a lane of smashed coral, then another blast to silence a port. The bars bark. White phosphorus throws a rolling screen that chokes the slit-sighted defenders. Flamethrowers, when they reach their seams, belch columns of burning fuel into dark apertures, an ugly, effective business, designed not for spectacle, but for closing the human space inside concrete. It is dirty work, and those who do it know the moral weight of every tactic they apply. At one bunker, Jackson crouches at the lip of a broken ledge. He watches men on 2 other axes move. He times his suppression to the chatter of a Thompson, not to kill, but to keep heads low. Then, as the flank team yells its advance, Jackson runs. He vaults a jagged shelf and drops a phosphorus grenade into a shallow vent. The flash blinds the slit. The gun's bark sputters. He hears a grunt, a defender choking with smoke, and knows the moment is his. He slams a satchel of C2 against the bunker's seam. 40 pounds of plastic explosive, placed where concrete has been weakened by old blast and repeated fire, will not make the structure vanish, but it will twist metal, crack rebar, and open a port big enough for a hand grenade. He steps back. Others fire to keep any head from peering out. The charge detonates with a focused fury. Concrete splits. Rebar groans. Men shove a fragmentation grenade into the breach. The bunker's reply is a half-blinded scattered fire, then silence as the attackers pour inside and sweep. Each pillbox takes a different key. One yields to a vent shot and a quick, improvised insertion of smoke and fragmentation. Another surrenders only after a flamethrower crew, having crawled on their bellies through a scrubbed channel of coral, reaches its rear approach and blows the door with shaped charges. The third, a stubborn, thick-walled emplacement, resists longest. It takes a combined assault, timing 3 axes at once, so the defenders cannot concentrate their fire. From above, machine guns that had stood mute begin to turn and fire into open lanes. Other firing ports, now exposed, light up with return fire. The counterattack that had tried to seal the initial hole is now in the exposed pocket between an advancing force and an enemy that has been forced back into reactive movement. The Japanese unit, Disciplined, trained, determined, attempts to reorganize and punch through at points of pressure. Marine squad leaders, small and decisive, see these ripples and respond. Bounding overwatch, grenades to break massed charges, concentrated bar fire to pin moving assemblies. At one point, a line of enemy fighters tries to press a shallow depression to get closer to Jackson's team. A coordinated burst from 2 bars and a Thompson snaps their movement like a taut wire. The fighting becomes intimate, brutal without spectacle. Men hurl themselves over coral ridges, find their hands carrying blood and grit, trade shots a few yards apart. Shouts are exchanged, not long speeches but quick calls. Grenade! Covered! Medic! The human scale compresses. A Marine slips, another hauls him to a scrape of shade and presses a bandage. Someone else keeps firing. These are the patterns of small unit warfare: mutuality, improvisation, and a relentless refocus on the nearest lethal threat. Time becomes a raw measure of everything else. Minutes are long when you are low on breath. Hours shrink into a movement of objectives. Somewhere inside the triangle of pillboxes, the enemy's reserve is committed, trying to push out and restore the line. Learned discipline, drilled reaction, and a will to hold make them dangerous even when surprised. But the combination of a newly opened lane, suppressed firing points, and the centrifugal effect of Marine reinforcements arriving from the rear begins to tell. An envelopment forms. Small teams that had been pinned now find angles to move. A pair of riflemen skirt a bunker's blind flank and drop a grenade into an air shaft. A flamethrower turns a seam into a funnel of heat. Demolitions men set charges to collapse firing ports. The Japanese attempt to consolidate and throw back the attackers, but their ordered movement is increasingly met by overlapping fire. The pocket is cut. The attempted seal becomes a trap. At one crucial instant, Jackson, already taxed by the weight of his bar and the taste of smoke in his mouth, is close enough to the nearest bunker to hear the thud of men's boots through concrete. He exposes himself to deliver a final suppressive sweep that allows a grenadier to get the angle he needs. A burst tears into Jackson's shoulder. It is not clean. He staggers, taste of copper sharp in his mouth, but he keeps firing. Men nearby drag him low. A medic reaches him, thumbs a bandage into the wound, and then, grimly efficient, prepares for evacuation. The wound is serious enough to pull him from the front. He had bled, and his shirt is a dark sore. He will later recount, in fragments and in the quiet, that at that moment he thought only of the men forward, and the single fact that the lane had to stay open. Now he is lifted, carried over splintered coral, and moved towards a makeshift aid station where surgeons, working under canvas and flares, pull shrapnel from muscle and stitch away the immediate danger. They will save him. He will survive. On the ground, the three-pronged assault completes its arc. The triangle collapses. Pillboxes that had seemed immovable are rendered weak and silent. The southern defensive belt, the contiguous line of concrete teeth that had carved the beach into kill zones, begins to loosen its grip. Within roughly 90 minutes from the moment Jackson left his place against the coral to run the first exposed yards, the commandability of that southern line has been broken enough for Marines to exploit in force. They pour through, flanking previously secure positions, escorting flamethrowers into gaps, and placing demolition charges that widen the breach into a lane of tactical movement rather than a single fragile hole. This is a moment of tactical consequence. The enemy's carefully constructed posture, interlocking fire, overlapping arcs, a patient reliance on fortification, had been punctured by an improvisational, violent combination of suppression, close assault, and coordinated follow-through. Jackson's initial run did not do all the work. It was the seed. What followed, small teams moving smartly, leaders taking initiative, resupply found in unexpected places, turned that seed into an artery through which the assault force could flow. There are costs. Dozens of men are hit in the fight. Some are mortally wounded, others glazed with wounds that will take weeks and months to mend. Casualty reports and after-action documents will later attempt to render these losses into numbers, into lines on paper. On the reef, they are faces and names and the smell of dust and antiseptic. The Japanese defenders pay dearly as well. Some bunkers are reduced to rubble. Others are cleared and prisoners taken. Yet the narrative of victory must hold alongside the narrative of sacrifice. This is not triumph without price. it is a costly purchase. When the smoke begins to thin and the tempo of close fighting declines into mopping up and consolidation, senior officers begin to reckon with the human calculus of the day. Recommendations filter up. Men who have taken exceptional risks are noted. For Jackson, who had already been carried off with a wound, there will be a formal recommendation for the nation's highest military award. The chain of supervision, squad leaders, company commanders, regimental staff, prepares a record. Action timeline, witness statements, corroboration of weapons and tactics used. The language in the report is precise and contained. For conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity, at the risk of his life above and beyond the call of duty. Phrasing that would later frame the Medal of Honor citation. The bureaucratic process that composes a Medal of Honor is stately and slow, relative to the instant of violence that produced it. Reports travel by radio and by written dispatch. Commanders annotate and forward, testimony is collected, and a recommendation climbs until it reaches the level where a presidential award may be authorized. For many men, the process is humbling. For some, it is unwanted attention. Jackson, when later asked about the medal and the publicity, would deflect. He was a soldier in the mud and the sea, he said in private tones, and he had done what the moment demanded. Public honors arrived nonetheless. President Harry S. Truman, the record notes, presented the Medal of Honor. The ceremony is a formal closure at one end of a long chain, ruffled flags, salutes, an attempt by the state to commemorate an act that, in its essence, was an act of improvisation and personal courage. In the aftermath, photographs, citations, and press accounts would fix Jackson's name in public memory. Men who had been anonymous in the din now received a kind of permanent recognition. It is a strange relief and a strange burden. The medal honors the action. It cannot conjure back the men who did not leave the island alive. After the war, life for Jackson, like life for many veterans, folded into a kind of double motion. Professionally, he continued service in the Marine Corps Reserve. The thread of duty did not snap cleanly when the island fell. He remained in uniform in a part-time capacity, keeping ties with comrades and the institution that had shaped those crucible hours. Civilian life arrived as well. Work, family, the slow accretion of responsibilities that come after a man has once witnessed fire. He did not become a loud celebrity. He preferred the quieter rhythms of ordinary life, though he would accept invitations to speak about the war on occasion, to stand among veterans and remember. Not all his later years were simple or without controversy. Decades after Peleliu, while assigned at Guantanamo Bay during a period of heightened tensions, Jackson was involved in a shooting incident that drew scrutiny and complicated his public record. The incident was investigated and debated. It became a footnote of controversy that did not erase his wartime valor, but added a difficult layer to his biography. He did not relish the attention that came from the incident. Friends and comrades recall a man more inclined to grunt and move on than to dwell on headlines. Through the sweep of his life, he returned, intermittently, to the memory of that reef. He visited reunions, talked with younger Marines, and, in a modest gesture of remembrance, donated his Medal of Honor flag to a Navy vessel, a symbol meant to connect the story of one man and his comrades to a living collective memory aboard ship. He spoke sparingly, and when he did, his words were often practical and deferred to the shared sacrifice of many. He lived into old age, a figure both honored and ordinary, and died in 2017 at the age of 92. History keeps a mixed ledger. There are the crisp lines of citations and the sterile numbers of official reports. There are also the lived textures, a man pressed to coral, a magazine clattering, a satchel of C2 detonating, a medic's fingers stained with grime. Both kinds of record matter. The tactical geometry of Peleliu, ventilation shafts, blind flanks, interlocking fields of fire, teaches students of war how fortification can be overcome by tempo and initiative. The human side teaches a less tidy lesson. Heroism is not a clean thing. It is improvisation under pressure. It is bravery braided with fear. It is action that saves and action that costs. When we look at the frame the title provides, 54 Japanese tried to kill one American. The shorthand is startling, almost cinematic in its contrast. It places individual courage against an organized defense and compresses a larger battle into a single vivid image, an underdog pierced by the weight of many, standing and acting. Remember, contemporary accounts vary. Some sources list nearer 50 defenders, others report as many as 54. This retelling used the title's figure while acknowledging the variance. Numbers matter for accuracy, but what the count cannot fully capture is the lived reality of a man and the small units that responded to him. The significance of Jackson's action is both immediate and lasting. Immediately, his assault unglued a defensive posture that had been otherwise unyielding, creating a lane that allowed the 7th Marines to press and, in the sequence of hours that followed, shatter a part of the southern belt. Longer term, the story enters a national memory where medals and ceremonies, newspaper headlines and archival images both honor and simplify what happened. Veterans' voices and scholarship add nuance, reminding us of the messiness, the improvisations, the moral choices under duress, and the long shadow those days cast on the men who lived through them. There is another trace that is harder to quantify, the way such stories shape collective memory and the obligations that follow. A Medal of Honor is a public way to say, this action mattered, but the duty of memory extends beyond medals. It asks communities to remember casualties, to preserve accurate records, to support survivors and families, and to tell these stories without turning them into uncritical myths. That means acknowledging complexity, the discipline of the enemy soldiers, the discipline of Marines who died, the subsequent controversies, and resisting the urge to reduce the narrative to simple triumphalism. In practical terms, the tactical lessons remain instructive. Fortified positions can be neutralized not just by superior firepower, but by a combination of tempo, improvisation, and coordinated follow-through. Small teams, when decisive and supported, can create opportunities that heavyweight assets like tanks or ships cannot, when terrain defeats wheels and anchors. A bar, a satchel of C2, a flamethrower, and a well-timed phosphorus grenade can, together, change the geometry of a battlefield in ways heavier systems cannot quickly replicate. That is military truth. It is also, in human terms, a truth about risk and responsibility. As a story, Arthur Jackson's run across Peleliu's reef compresses a great many things: courage and terror, tactical ingenuity and ethical burden, immediate gain and long-term consequence. He was 19, and that fact is not incidental. Youth and agency intersected in a moment that required a decision no training manual could perfectly script: to run, to expose himself, to risk death in order to create a path for others. Time has a way of both honoring and interrogating such choices. We carry these narratives forward for several reasons. We study them to understand how wars are fought and won. We preserve them to honor those who served and the price they paid. We revisit them to keep a nuanced memory alive, one that can teach new generations about courage without fetishizing violence, about sacrifice without dehumanizing the opponent, and about recognition without forgetting complexity. If this story moved you, share it and tell us where you're watching from. Help keep these memories alive.